I want to welcome everyone to our Live Well and Stay Healthy Wellness webinar series brought to you by the Family and Community Health Sciences Department of Rutgers Cooperative Extension. My name is Rachel Tansey, and I'm a Senior Extension Associate with Family and Community Health Sciences working out of Monmouth County. Today, Joanne Kinsey and myself will be presenting the program on healthy benefits of herbs. Before we begin, I just wanted to go over, if you could advance to the next slide, Joanne, just some of our webinar logistics, actually the next one even as well, that we are cooperative extension, and we are part of Rutgers Cooperative Extension, housed out of the State University of New Jersey, and we are partners with the USDA's National Institute of Food and Drug, USDA, so I'm trying to let people in at the same time. Where was I? The Agriculture and Natural Resources Department is part of our office, as well as 4-H Youth Development and the Family and Community Health Sciences Department. We reach many of the counties in New Jersey. We are actually housed in 20 of the 21 counties throughout New Jersey. And today, as I mentioned, we will be discussing health benefits of herbs. As I mentioned earlier, we ask if everyone could please keep themselves muted and their videos turned off. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, or any questions for the presenter at the end will be addressed as well in the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, so we would appreciate if everyone could help us and participate when the time is to ask any questions. We will also have a poll at the end, and we ask if you can complete that as well, as that helps us learn different aspects of the program, what works, what doesn't work, and helps us build better programs for the future. So let me do the little introduction here I have for everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce both myself and Joanne. As I mentioned, my name is Rachel Tansey, and I am located in Monmouth County. I have my bachelor's degree in nutritional sciences from Rutgers University. Have been working with Rutgers Cooperative Extension for over 20 years now. And my master's degree is from Georgian Court University in holistic health. My focus areas are nutrition, health, wellness, worksite wellness, and pretty much all of the areas of life, school and beyond, older adults and youth. We have been working with many different programs that we focus and just try to promote overall healthy wellness. Joanne Kinsey is also our speaker today, and she has been with Rutgers Cooperative Extension and Family Community Health Sciences as an educator and an associate professor down in Atlantic and Ocean counties. We are funded through the New Jersey Agriculture Experiment Station, and Ms. Kinsey has her master's degree from Drexel, where she is certified as a workforce wellness specialist and also a registered yoga teacher. Joanne's specialization areas are nutrition, worksite wellness, and healthy lifestyles, human development, laughter therapy, and technology and education. She has also developed the Healthy on the Job Workforce Wellness Program, which provides evidence-based enhanced information to employers and their employees. Joanne also enjoys making simple online recipe videos for our consumers. So as I mentioned, today's program will be on the health benefits of herbs and how they can be beneficial for our health. So without further ado, let's move on. Just gonna.
Rachel, are we recording?
Yes, we're recording. So that's the structure of our department that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to talk a little bit about herbs. So what is an herb? Actually, an herb is any plant with leaves, stems, flowers used in flavoring your food. Could be used medicinally, could be used as a perfume for a fragrance, could be flowers and such as you see in these pictures that are even edible. Many different herbs and parts of the plant are used for different things that they will be used for. Next slide, please. So what is a medicinal herb? Actually, a medicinal herb is essentially used to treat diseases more often than not of a chronic type nature, but really to promote and improve health. We are using different medicinal herbs throughout our country, but really they've been around for centuries in many other countries as well. And they are used and should be considered more or less as a drug, because they can have some counterindications with other maybe drugs or other supplements or things that you would be taking. So you need to be careful that whatever you may be taking doesn't cause some interaction with other things as well and have bad reactions. The next. Okay, so just some of our common herbs and their benefits. You may have heard of many of these. Chamomile often comes in a tea form. This stimulates digestion and aids in anxiety and stress. It helps calm one's both digestive tract. If you're having a little bit of a stomach ache, chamomile tea is very good for that. And even something like sleepy time tea or something along those lines often have chamomile in them as well to promote a sense of rest and relaxation. Echinacea, a lot of people have seen this, often known as the purple cone flower. They're really pretty in your garden as well, all of these herbs. So the Echinacea plant is used actually as an immune booster, and it has been seen to possibly help shorten the length of certain respiratory infections and help build up a resistance to certain things as well going on in our body, whether it be a cold or anything of that sort. So Echinacea can also be very, very beneficial to the immune. Feverfew, if it's taken daily, can actually help prevent migraines. However, if the migraine has already begun, it does not help at that point. So it needs to be taken as a preventative, not as a relief. Garlic, these are our 3 G's here. Garlic may help reduce your LDL cholesterol. Your LDL cholesterol, I like to call that our loser cholesterol. That's the bad cholesterol. So we don't want our bad cholesterol to be high. We also have HDL cholesterol, which is our happy cholesterol. So we do want that to be high. So really the LDL cholesterol can benefit from garlic in your diet. Some people do take it as a supplement in a pill, but it's really helpful to have it as part of your daily diet if you can. Maybe not every day, but you can incorporate it for flavor. And that's really, a lot of people enjoy the taste of garlic as well. Also, it can possibly help treat mild hypertension. Ginger, here is a picture of the ginger root, which can be used for nausea and help relieve digestive upset or, digestive stress in the gut area. And it could even prevent motion sickness. So there's a lot of different ginger treats even out there, lollipops and little ginger chews. There's ginger tea, some of which can be quite spicy, which if you don't like that spice in your mouth, then you could try some of the other things like the lollipops or the ginger chews. And I will tell you, I have tried the ginger chews myself and they do help. I get car sick a lot, so they do help with that. Ginkgo biloba can be used for circulation. And it may be helpful in concentration, memory, your absent-mindedness, headaches, and that ringing in the ears. There's been some beneficial evidence shown that may help there as well. But we'd always recommend talking to a physician or someone of the medical background to be sure you're taking the proper supplements for what your needs are. Couple more of our common herbs and their health benefits. Cranberries actually are very helpful to help prevent and treat urinary tract infections. So unfortunately, we're not talking about cranberry juice like the cocktail. Those typically have other juices in there. We're talking about cranberry juice that would be 100% cranberry juice, which can be a little bit tart, can be a little bit bitter. However, you can do maybe 3/4 of a glass of the cranberry juice and add a little bit of water just to kind of dilute it a bit. And that will help with the kidneys and the urinary tracts. Also, it may help fight certain bacteria that could possibly cause stomach ulcers as well. St. John's wort, this pretty little yellow flower here, can also be used to treat mild to moderate depression. However, it should not be taken with other antidepressants. That's one of which that I was mentioning earlier. There can be possible interactions with other medications that you may be on. So this is used a lot in other areas of the world as an antidepressant, and it can be quite powerful. So we want to be sure that we are watching what we're taking and making sure that we're not having any interactions with other supplements or medications and such that we may be on. There's an oil for St. John's wort as well that is often used for treating wounds or abrasions, little cuts, maybe even first-degree burns. So that's very helpful as well. And Valerian, I believe many people have heard of. This is used as a supplement typically to help with sleep problems. It has a mild sedative effect. It says tranquilizing effect. I think it more helps people fall asleep, I guess, and taken in massive quantities can have some type of tranquilizing effect. But again, this is where we stress, be sure we're taking the appropriate amounts and have some type of advice from a physician or some other, licensed person to give you the advice that you need. We're just simply here telling you what they are used for. I am by no means, saying go out and buy this if you're having, some issues. So we want to make sure that you understand that to always consult with your physician first. And it may help in that relaxing effect, relieve some muscle spasms and anxiety as well. So as we're looking at our herbs and even anything green, typically green leafy type of fruits and vegetables, we're looking at many healthy and nutritious aspects. So your nutrient content is a multitude of vitamins and minerals, which help keep our bodies healthy and strong. Many antioxidants and phytochemicals actually found in a lot of dark green leafy vegetables that can help protect against certain cancers. And they're really good for the fiber intake, which they're high in fiber and they help slow our digestion and help us stay full longer. So that helps our digestive tract work and function properly. And they tend to be typically a little bit more water-based, so that even has a hydrating effect. So having, a handful of spinach or something like that might give you a bit of hydration as well. So some of the key vitamins that you see here on the right-hand side and nutrients would be vitamin C, again, help improve and strengthen our immune system to help fight infections, build protective proteins in our bodies, and just a handful of spinach contains 28 milligrams of vitamin C. That's quite a lot. Not many people realize that vitamin C can be found in dark green leafy vegetables. Also vitamin K in dark green vegetables as well. And this is responsible for the blood clotting in our body. So if you're on some type of blood thinner, then we typically, need to suggest you talk to your physician about having too much vitamin K. However, we do need this to help our body just kind of make the clots to help just sort of form that scab or whatever, just a little barrier when you get a little cut or a scrape. So dark green leafy vegetables are very helpful there as well. Iron. This iron is used to help our oxygen move throughout our lungs and throughout our body, and overall just general health and energy levels helps keep us a little bit more I'm going to say with lack of iron, we typically fatigue. That's one of the side effects of having lack of iron. So having a proper amount of iron in our body helps us kind of move and function throughout the day at a normal pace. And then calcium. Calcium is important as well for strong bones and teeth, and they can be found in our dark green leafy vegetables, which calcium needs two other things in order to be functional in the body, one of which is vitamin C. So if you're having a handful of spinach, you're getting quite a bit of calcium and quite a bit of vitamin C. And then you need your vitamin D, which comes from the sun. So you would be set and your calcium is ready to be absorbed into the body and build those strong bones and teeth. So this is just a picture of some of the more commonly used culinary herbs. Typically, I think I have, almost all of those growing in the backyard, maybe minus a couple, but we typically grow these all summer, start in the spring, all summer long. And these are great to keep on hand. Certain ones will come back. My chives come back every year. They're perennials. The mint will go crazy, especially if you plant it in the ground. So I actually typically keep mine in a pot. And all of these different culinary herbs can be used for many different things. And, Joanne will go into a little bit more detail on that later. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overall picture here on some of the more commonly used culinary herbs. And then here was just a couple suggestions on how to just always get more herbs whenever you can. One of the things we did last summer was it got to be sort of the end of the summer, beginning of fall, and I wanted to make some pesto, but I really didn't have enough basil and I didn't have enough, a couple other things. But what I did was I simply took every green herb that was growing out in my yard and essentially put it all together with a couple of handfuls of spinach and some walnuts and some olive oil and a little garlic, fresh garlic. And that we put it in the blender. It made a beautiful pesto sauce. It tasted delicious. And we actually froze it in little mason jars, just like this picture, so that we could use it in the winter. So it worked out really well. And we had fresh pesto come the winter, and it froze up real nice. It just defrosted in the refrigerator overnight, and we put it on our pasta and our chicken the next day. Another thing I would suggest to just throw more herbs in. We typically think of it as seasoning our main dishes. Whether we're making chicken or something like that, we kind of throw some herbs in there. However, you can throw it in something like spinach. You can use spinach and throw it in something like a smoothie, and then add in a handful of mint as well. And that little sprinkle of mint with your spinach will help enhance the flavors of your smoothie, and then you're getting extra nutrients in your diet there. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Joanne now.
Okay, we'll pick it up from here. Herbs are beautiful, and they grow very, very easily. And Rachel showed you a picture of many of the herbs that we can easily grow here in New Jersey, in a pot, in our yard, on a front step, maybe even on a sunny windowsill, because they just grow easy. They don't need a lot of attention. Mainly what they need is to be used, because usually the more you use them, then the more they will grow. There are some herbs that really don't need to be fussy, and I think rosemary is probably one of them. Lavender also. They really don't need a whole lot of attention or feeding. In most cases, they just like to grow. They just need a place to grow. So we can also grow herbs inside. And here you see some herbs in a sunny windowsill. So if you have a place in the winter where you can have small amounts of herbs like this, you can easily have them ready to go when you're cooking something and say, oh, I could just put a little bit of rosemary in this, or add some, I see some thyme there, or basil. It's so nice to have on hand for the winter time. So like what I do is I have my herbs growing in pots in the summer and into the fall, and most of them last pretty well into the fall, and make lots of pestos and that kind of thing to freeze and have them ready to go for the winter. And then in the wintertime, I like having a little bit of an indoor garden, because once you have those fresh herbs and you have access to them, you want to make sure you have them all the time, because they just add so much flavor and interest to your foods. So herbs they love sun. So they're going to need full sun, or pretty much sun, at least 6 hours of sun. There are a few that may do well with a little bit less sun than that. So they need to be very happy in the sun. And you can plant them very early. In fact, the chives you see in this picture have come back year after year. My friend and colleague from another state, Alice Henneman, took that picture, but I had herbs on my step in a long trough container that for about 6 or 7 years. And then for some reason, they didn't make it one winter. But I mean, how can you beat that, right? You have these nice, beautiful herbs that come back no matter what you do. And I do have herbs now in a pot here in New Jersey that are sitting, and they came up, and they're beautiful and they're ready to use. So think about, when you have these herbs, how can you use them? Because chives, for example, have a pretty long season, and they actually are right in this position where you can see in that picture right now. They're ready to bud, and that's okay too. And they are edible. The buds are, the flowers are as well. So think about how you can use them, because this is something that will just keep coming back year after year. You'll be really surprised at how well they can manage. There are lots of herbs that like to live together in a pot too. And here in the pot on the left, I see rosemary and parsley and sage and chives, for an example, that like to be together. Mint, for one, as Rachel said, is a good one to have in its own pot, because mint is very invasive. I mean, it's a wonderful herb, and we can use it in lots of things. I use it in my pestos all the time, and in iced teas and that type of thing. But if you don't rein it in and keep it contained, it'll just take over your garden, and it will come back every year. So when planting mint, this one just needs a little bit of different care. If you're going to put it in the ground, it's best to have it in a pot or a container that doesn't have a drainage hole, and you actually dig it right into the ground, because that way it will keep it from spreading. So remember this, if you have that drainage hole in the bottom of your pot, guess what? Your mint is going to show up all around the pot and in other places in your garden, whether you want it or not. You don't need to water mint too much. It's really so very hardy and so useful in the kitchen too. So we need to talk a little bit about what to do when we have these herbs, because as they're growing, they will continue to grow if you use them. Many of them, the more you cut them back, the more they will continue to grow until they kind of outlive their season. So what do we do with them and how do we harvest them? The best time to harvest most herbs is in the morning before the hot sun gets to them. This is when they are the most lively and they have the greatest texture and the greatest color for whatever they are. So think about doing that early in the day. And it's always best to harvest your herbs before they set flower, because in this particular plant, this looks like basil to me. It has set flower already. And once your plants start to set flower like that, they look beautiful. And if that's what you want to use them for, that's fine too. But that will also indicate the end of their growing season to the plant. So you may lose your plant soon after that. So keeping those flower buds off, you can just usually pinch them off with a small pair of scissors, or sometimes you can pinch them off just with your fingers, just kind of grab around the flower as you see it start to come on real early on, and just, pluck it away. That'll keep your herbs really fresh. So now once we harvest some, what do we do with them? There are some ways that are better than others to keep your herbs for a few days, and you can keep them in a refrigerator in a crisper drawer, and they will last a few days. If they're very wet, they probably won't last very long. So let's look a little bit more closely at what really works even better. If you take a brown bag or a white bag in this case, and you have holes in it, and just simply, tie the top together or just fold it over, and you can keep it in your refrigerator. You can keep it that way too. But this is also a good way to air dry your herbs, because by having them in a closed sort of container, like a bag, then we make sure that insects would not get to them, and so you can have a little bit more assurance that your herbs are going to be insect free when you go to use them. So you can also cut some holes in there. That way they get the air. You can also use a dehydrator if you want to dry your herbs. That works very well too. So this way works very well. And I do this at times when I have a lot in the garden and I really need to trim it back. I will just put it in a jar of water and replace the water maybe every day or every other day. And that will keep your herbs fresh for about a week, sometimes even a little bit longer. So consider that. If you say, gee, I have all this mint, but I don't know what to do with it, or all this basil, what am I going to do with it? And I really need to cut it back. Then try leaving it in the water, just like you would have for any cutting of a flower, for a few days. It's kind of nice to have that in your kitchen too, like on your counter, or really handy, so that when you're cooking, you can just snip off a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So when we go to use our herbs, it's always best to clean them under cool running water right before you use them. Don't pick them or harvest them or bring them home from a supermarket and rinse them off and then try to store them. They will not last that way. We save the cleaning for when we are ready to use them, because they're very delicate. Herbs are very kind of light, and they don't have a whole lot of structure for the most part, but they're delicate. So we want to treat them very carefully. A salad spinner works well for herbs, especially if you have large amounts. Maybe you're going to be drying herbs using a dehydrator or something. I find a salad spinner works really well without damaging the herbs too much. And you can also just pat them dry with a paper towel. That works great too. So what about chives? Chives, of course, you can always cut them on a cutting board if that's your preference. But if you have a pair of scissors that you keep in your kitchen that are kitchen shears, so we're not cutting other things with them, then cutting them is probably about the easiest thing to do, because you can snip into small little pieces to sprinkle on a salad or a side dish, or even on a finished product, whatever you're making. They look really nice, and they're perfect on salads of all kinds, and even sometimes on a very lightly dressed pasta or in a pasta salad. So with cilantro, parsley, and some other herbs that have very delicate leaves, what you want to do is remove the leaf by hand. There's nothing wrong with the stem, and you can use the stems of some of these herbs, especially unless they're really hard and woody. You don't want to use them. But if you're making a pesto, you can put these stems right into your food processor. But if you want a dish where you're just going to have the ends of the parsley, the leaf of the parsley, you'll have to be really careful and do that by hand. It usually works better than even using a knife. So some of the herbs are kind of an interesting little predicament in how to take those tiny little leaves off. So if we were talking about thyme, or any kind of thyme, or oregano, rosemary, tarragon, and some other very small leafed herbs, what we do is we need to run our thumb and our index finger down the side of the stem in the opposite direction of the way they grow. And seriously, this is the easiest way to take the leaves off, or to de-stem those herbs, is just kind of hold one end and push your fingers across the other side, and all of your tiny little leaves are ready to go. And your stems for those kinds of herbs, you would not want to be using them. Although I will say, I always keep a bag handy in my freezer, and some of you have heard me say this before, with vegetable ends or pieces that I'm going to use for a vegetable stock down the road. I will take small amounts of stem of some herbs and tuck that in the bag too, because that really will give your stock some really nice flavor too. So when it comes to chopping herbs, something like tarragon or something like of that size, it's really best to wash your herbs, get them clean, pat dry, put them on your cutting board, and then you want to use a good sharp knife, and you want to be very careful with that, of course. You don't want to get cut, to just cut the leaves. Like, we're not trying to bruise the leaves or damage them. We just want to make good sharp cuts in the leaves, so that when we're using the herb, it retains the texture, the flavor, and the appearance of the natural herb. Some people like to use a chef's knife to do this, and put all the leaves together in your cutting board, and then rock the knife back and forth to get the smaller size that you may want. So it's good to try to gather up your leaves and keep them in one place. And it does save a lot of time to do that too, so that you're cutting them pretty much all at the same time. Another thing you can do, it's called chiffonade. And this is much easier than it sounds. You take your leaves, for example, this picture shows basil, and you can take several basil leaves. You can take 5 or 6 basil leaves together and roll them up so they look like they're kind of in a log. And then you take your sharp knife and you cut crosswise across the leaf, because remember, it's all rolled up now, and you end up with these really nice kind of ribbony pieces of your herb that works really nice in many dishes. It looks beautiful, and you're really still keeping intact the texture and the flavor of the herb. So what about freezing and drying? Herbs are pretty durable, And there are lots of ways that we can extend our harvest. So if you have a dehydrator, or you know someone who does, maybe maybe you could kind of buddy up and see if you can learn a little bit about dehydrating to see if that's for you. Dehydrators, the one I have has various temperatures and a time set. So it's a digital dehydrator. So it kind of takes a little bit of the guesswork out, but really works with, yeah. What works best is a good booklet, maybe from USDA, about herbs and dehydration, that tells you the approximate times for dehydrating herbs, because kind of a no-brainer, right? The thicker the leaves, the longer the dehydration time, or the more durable the herb, like rosemary, for example, you can have a higher temperature for dehydration. So you want to make sure that you'll have a booklet that usually comes with a nice dehydrator like this. So look at the directions and follow them. And when you're dehydrating, usually I set the time and the temperature for whatever it is. Maybe it's basil, and I'll check it maybe every couple hours just to see, how's it coming along. There are several racks in this dehydrator you can see here. Sometimes I rotate the racks to make sure that the hot air is circulating where I want it through all of the different levels of the racks. So follow the directions for the best results. When you're using a dehydrator, you dehydrate your food on various trays, and it depends on the dehydrator. Maybe the limit they may tell you would be to have 5 or 6 trays at a time in the dehydrator. So, and like I said, you may want to move the positioning of some of the trays as you're moving along. Some trays, the one on the right there is pretty much like your typical dehydration tray, but then there are other trays that have even smaller little sections to them for smaller herbs or dehydrating smaller foods. And then there's also sort of a plastic sheet that you can put into your dehydrator tray for very small herbs, because thinking about something like thyme, and maybe even oregano, very small, it's going to fall through your rack if your rack spaces are too wide. So these trays really are very, very useful when you're dehydrating. Another way to preserve your herbs is to do that in oil or water, and an ice cube tray works very well for this. And what you want to do when you're preparing this is thinking about, how am I going to use these herbs down the road? Can I take 1 or 2 of these ice cubes, which are herb cubes, in my freezer and put them into a soup? Absolutely. Can I toss them into my pasta? You can do that too. I mean, there are lots of uses. So that's why sometimes using an ice cube tray is very helpful. You can chop up the sprigs or the leaves and put them in the tray. You can cover them just very little bit with oil. Olive oil works really well. I think that works the best, or a little bit of water. So just so you know, that when you freeze some herbs, if it's in oil or water, it doesn't matter. They may turn color, and they probably will turn black, some of them. So if you think they're going to come out and look as wonderful and fresh as the day you harvested them, they may not, but the flavor will be intact. And I think that's the most important part. We want to retain that flavor so that when we're cooking, we can use these and be happy with the product. Freezing in freezer bags is really my preferred way of doing this. I have done the ice cube tray method with pesto, and that works well too. But the nice freezer bags, and even small ones, you can even get really small ones, so that you can freeze your pesto in maybe a 1/2 cup or a 1/4 cup amount, and then be ready to go with it for whatever you want to do. I would suggest that when you put your herbs in your plastic bags, that if it's a pesto or fresh herbs, that you try to get as much of the extra air out of the bag as possible before you seal the bag. And then you can lay them on top of a cookie tray or a baking sheet, whatever fits in your freezer. And if you lay them flat, then they will freeze flat, and it'll fit a little bit better in your freezer. I think when it comes to pesto, this really works the best, is to take the pesto, put it in the small Ziploc bags, get the air out, make sure you label it with exactly what it is and the date you're putting it into the freezer, and then lay them on your cookie sheets so that they're all going to be able to stack really nicely together. And just a little tip about making pesto. My favorite pestos are mixed herb pestos. You can use lemon balm. Um, you can use various kinds of mint. Basil is actually in the mint family. I would go really easy on the oregano in a pesto, but there's lots of herbs that you can mix together. And as Rachel said, you can add spinach or kale to it too. And I do that very often. If I have, quite a bit of arugula in my refrigerator and I think, wow, I really could extend this very nicely. Just think you're adding nutrients and you're adding flavor to whatever you're going to use this for. Pesto freezes well for 3 to 6 months. I can say that from my experience, I freeze it for maybe up to a year, and it works fine. As long as you have it in a good deep freeze in a nice sealed bag, it'll hang in there for you pretty good. If you want to freeze herbs alone, when you wash them, you want to make sure they're pretty dry before you put them into a freezer bag. And you do want to make sure you get the extra air out of them too. And you can even put them in like a little bit of a plastic wrap first and then into the bag. But keep in mind, when they come out, it's like freezing a tomato, let's say. When you put it in, it's beautiful and plump. And when you take it out, it kind of gets soft and mushy. Well, your herbs are not going to be as firm and beautiful when they come out of the freezer, but don't let that fool you. The flavor is still there. So let's talk about what's the difference between spices and herbs, because sometimes people get confused about this, but it makes sense. Spices come from the bark or the root or the buds or the seeds of a plant. And actually, I could think about a little bit more of the sturdier part of the plant is kind of the way I think about it. And that's where you get, cinnamon, ginger, and so on, and your peppers. But herbs are like low growing shrubs or kind of a big plant, although sometimes they can be very big, and especially if they're coming back every year. These would be like your parsley, marjoram, chives. There's just so many herbs that we could talk about it. And these are the ones that we can use down the road. We can dry them, we can freeze them, we can dry them and grind them down the road or whatever we want to do. But we do lots of our seasonings with herbs and maybe a combination of herbs and spices together. So when you're in the supermarket, a seasoning blend is pretty much a mixture of various herbs and spices. So if you see something, be sure to read the label in the market to make sure it's something that has herbs and spices that you like or your family likes, that you'll be happy with. And you might want to look for those that have no salt added to them as well. So let's talk about that just really quickly. Herbs, various seasonings are a great replacement for fat in your cooking. Fat adds flavor to your food, and so does salt. But a lot of people are restricted in how much sodium they have to have in a day or the amount of fat that they're getting in a day. So use your herbs and spices in place of salt, in place of fat, and see what you come up with, because you will add so much flavor to your foods so naturally with herbs. Growing a small amount of herbs in a pot can be so rewarding because you can use them fresh, you can dry them or freeze them or use them in various dishes down the road, even in the wintertime. It makes it kind of fun, really adds a little extra punch of flavor to your food. So there's two basic types of tastes that we use. We like things that are sweet, obviously, and some people like things that have a little bit more flavor or a little bit more bite to them. So your sweet tasting spices are listed there on the left. And if you bake, you know what I'm talking about, that these add a lot of flavor to your cakes or muffins or cookies, whatever you're making. And they can replace the flavor of sugar by just adding that they have their own sweetness to them. So you are able to reduce some of the amount of sugar. So when it comes to the savory flavors to the right, these are the ones that we can say we can replace salt in our cooking with some of these foods because they have a really good punch of flavor. So if there's something there on that list that you've never tried, think about it. You know, try to look for recipes where you can maybe make a combination of those herbs or spices and see if you find something new that you didn't like or never tried before. We have lots of recipe videos online, and there's pesto recipes, and there's lots of recipes using various fresh herbs. This one that we have on this slide is a garlic scape pesto over pasta. And that is so super tasty. And I remember the first time I really became familiar with garlic scapes was at a school garden on Long Beach Island. And the school was, you know, really intense with their garden and did such a fabulous job. And they were having their annual garlic scape pasta. And I was invited to see that, to see the way they harvested, how they made the pesto, and how all the students got to taste it. And it's really very good. So a garlic scape is really the green part that comes off of your garlic, and they usually turn and twist as they're growing. So I'm trying to think, this was probably done in June, early June. The garlic was already in the ground from the fall, I believe. And the scapes come up just like sort of like chives in the spring. And they create this really kind of interesting curly leaf, like a stem, actually, I should say. And they get harvested. And then the garlic stays in the ground still until the fall when it is finally harvested. So look that up online sometime. It's kind of an interesting process, and you might want to give it a try yourself. There's lots of information out there on various herbs and using them and storing them and freezing them, dehydrating them. And I suggest, if you're going to look at dehydration in particular, that you look up some very reliable sources that will tell you exactly what you need to know. So here's an example of lots of resources, and you can see some of them are ours, and then Purdue, University of Missouri, University of Georgia, they all put out a lot of really good information that can certainly help with making your decisions about what you want to know about herbs and spices down the road.